Hi, I'm Steve Clapham. Welcome to the Behind the Balance Sheet podcast, where we meet leading investors and commentators and educate ourselves about the world of investing and the world at large. Our mission is to remove some of the mystique around investing and improve our understanding of what makes a successful investment or indeed an unsuccessful one. Our goal is to inform, educate, and entertain. We hope you enjoy this and every episode.
Behind the Balance Sheet and affiliates and podcast guests may own shares or have an economic interest in securities discussed in this podcast, which is aired for your education and entertainment only. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or relied upon for investment decisions. Always do your own research.
Hi, I'm Steve Clapham. I'm the founder of Behind the Balance Sheet, and I'm here to talk to Aneeka Ghedia from Blackwood, the executive search firm, and she specialises in finding people for roles in private credit. And private credit is a massive growth area right now. So what sort of people do you look for? What sort of people do well in going for jobs in private credit?
Yeah, I guess in its simplest form, if you have a healthy level of scepticism, then private credit might be for you. But I suppose kind of expanding on that, there definitely is a lot of complexity involved when thinking about credit structuring, and it can be quite varied in the way individuals will invest across the capital structure on the debt side, but just in the way they're thinking about kind of structuring these transactions. And that can be a really appealing part of joining private credit. So I think I'd probably summarize it with that just initially.
And what are the most common routes in? I mean, what sort of people do you look for these sorts of roles?
Yeah, so I suppose there are various strategies within private credit, special situations through to direct lending, the more vanilla stuff. Leverage finance is a huge pool of candidates for these private credit firms. So that's within the investment banks. They work alongside M&A teams that solely focused on structuring the debt. And oftentimes, a lot of our clients that are in private credit are always thinking about leverage finance. And then probably secondary, well, not secondary to that, but just as equally important, restructuring. And that can be found in the boutiques where they're a bit more focused on these kind of turnaround situations, thinking about distressed companies and those sorts of transactions.
And is there a lot of movement between the sort of different categories of private credit, or when you're good at distressed debt, you never will end up going back to direct lending? Is it very much you specialise early on?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because sometimes, there will be individuals that are in direct lending and they're thinking about, they want to look at more riskier investments. They want to think about kind of distressed companies. Maybe they enjoy that space more. And it is slightly more difficult to make that transition, but it can be done. And it definitely is a transition that's made. What might be slightly easier is going the other way around. So from kind of special situations or distressed credit investing into direct lending. That being said, you don't want to spend too much time in either or and specialize to the extent where you're just not as transferable as your peers around you that have spent a few more years in that area.
And are there different skill sets? I mean, what makes a good candidate? Is it you presumably you've got to be numerate?
Yeah.
I mean, what are the sort of qualities that your clients look for?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's the fundamental analytical skills that a lot of the teams within investment banking teach you, that they might hire from M&A as well. But M&A, leverage finance, restructuring, these are the kind of main teams they're looking at. And then probably more so suited to credit is where if you have that kind of, you've been assessing risk, you have been looking at the credit for the most part, you know how to kind of protect the downside. You're thinking about kind of structuring a loan. Essentially, you have that experience, and oftentimes leverage finance and restructuring, it teaches you that. And then, if thinking kind of going wider than that, wider than private credit, there are also kind of fixed income teams where they might hire from credit research or desk analysts. There's a whole host, but ultimately it's really kind of structuring loans. And then doing these sorts of models like capital structure modeling, recovery analysis, recovery modeling, and then of course kind of LBO modeling.
And so modeling's a really important talent to have. And if you don't have that talent probably shouldn't consider it. What other things would make somebody fall down in a process? I mean, what are the sort of common pitfalls that you see when people fail, they don't get to the next stage?
Yeah, so definitely kind of the way individuals articulate a business or articulate a deal that they've worked on. And I always say, I think the kind of best way to prepare for that is not to think of your job in a bank as just your job and kind of doing the bare basics. Maybe kind of have the foresight to think, you want to be an investor while you're working on a deal. Think about what view you have on that specific, on how that's been valued, or what the model is, what the risks were, how they were mitigated. Do you agree with the way that they were mitigated? Having that kind of investor mindset from the offset, or training your mind to think that way, can really help in the process. And so oftentimes when individuals fall down because maybe they don't quite have the investor mindset, that's a big one. Obviously the case study and the way you kind of perform on that case study is a huge factor, and practicing the modeling is a big part of kind of preparation, because they're very time constrained, and the best way to kind of tackle that is really to make it muscle memory in the way that you can implement the model.
Modeling. One other thing I wanted to ask you was, if you were going for a job with a public equities investor, you generally look at what they own, and so you can get some, you can do some prep that way. That's much more difficult, probably impossible in private credit. I mean, you might happen to notice that somebody's involved in a recent deal or something. Are there any other ways of getting intelligence on the firm and what they own, so you can find some common ground before you go in?
Yeah, I mean, there are still kind of online platforms where you are able to kind of get a sense of what they've invested in, how they've invested. And I always think a really great way is to ask your headhunter, because oftentimes we're having conversations with the client on what specific deals they've worked on, how they went about that transaction, and we can offer that context. And a good headhunter should be able to kind of tell you a bit more about the deals that they've worked on, and get a better sense of, for you, the investment strategy.
So that's a really, really good advice. If you're in a process and you're in a process with a headhunter, is often these opportunities come up through headhunters. Make sure you ask the headhunter a lot of questions, and you don't mind that, right?
Exactly. In fact, kind of the more questions, the better. It shows real kind of intent and thoughtfulness around, you care about what you're interviewing for, and it helps you to hone your answers in a specific way. When you go into that process and to talk about pitfalls, another thing that lets individuals down is if they don't quite understand the investment strategy that they're interviewing for. And often that's probably because they just haven't asked enough questions about the role and about the strategy, or done enough research.
So that's really helpful roundup of private credit. And the thing to take away is do your preparation.
Yeah.
Aneeka, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.